Yes.
I'm just so tickled to be here and talking with you today. And what I thought I would do is just talk a little bit to begin, and then I want to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. And so that's how if that works, that'll be great.
That is perfect for us.
That sounds great. So I want to thank you so much to Kim. Thank you also to Superintendent Mary Krieger, who is here, I think, and your amazing principal. And to all of you, 9th grade civics class. So as I was getting ready to talk to you, I did a little research, and I looked up what civics is. And I read that civics is about studying your rights and responsibilities as citizens. And so that is really, really interesting and super important right now. You know, democracy, we live in a democracy, a constitutional democracy, which means, as you know from studying civics, that the people decide. It's up to the people. That's what our Constitution says. In the preamble of the Constitution, it says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the United States of America." That's what the Constitution says. That's the preamble. That's the beginning of the whole shebang. And so what that means is that the people are in charge. It means as your United States Senator, I work for you. I work for you and your families and your communities. I work for every single person in Minnesota, regardless of whether they're a Democrat or Republican. I work for everybody. And you know, because you're studying it right now, the branches of government. I understand you just finished studying about the executive branch.
Yes,
is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so you're moving into studying the legislative branch, which is where I serve at the federal level, and then you'll get to the judicial branch of government after that. So let me just tell you a little bit about what it's like to be in the legislative branch in Congress. And as you know, you have 2 United States senators. I'm one, Amy Klobuchar is the other one. So how did I get this job? Like, how did that happen? I actually was appointed to this job when Senator Franken resigned. I was appointed to the United States Senate by Governor Dayton, and then I ran twice in 2 years to earn a 6-year term, which is what happens when you're a senator. You have a 6-year term. But here's how it really happened. When I was a young mom, I had 2 little kids, and I wanted to get involved in my local community. That was sort of my civic duty, right? I wanted to figure out how I could help make my community better. And I did it by showing up to work on local campaigns in where I lived up in St. Louis Park, knocking on doors and talking to my neighbors. And I started out as a volunteer and an organizer. And then one thing led to another, and I started to move into the public sector. I became the chief of staff for the mayor of Minneapolis. That happened, I think, pretty much about the same year that most of you were born. I then became the chief of staff for the governor of Minnesota, and then he asked me to run for lieutenant governor, and that was in 2014. And I had never run for office before, and I actually didn't even think that I wanted to run for office. But I did it, and I loved it. And then I ended up running and serving in the United States Senate. And I think that when I think about my job and what my job is, how I approach it, basically my job is to do everything I can to help make Minnesota and this country work better for the people who live here. Make it work better, make government work better for people. And you know, government has a specific job to play. Government doesn't do everything. My old friend Mayor Ryback used to say, like, if you have a toaster fire in your kitchen, you can put out that fire in your toaster. But if that fire gets big and it could affect other people in your community, then the fire truck comes in, because we all agree together that we want to put out fires. We all agree together that we think that we should have safe streets. We all agree together, and that's what we do together, and that's what happens with government. That's my job. My job is to make sure that government is working so that people in this country have the freedom and the opportunity to live and to build the lives that they want to live and build. Now, but what does that mean actually? Like, what's an example of that? Well, the other thing that I believe really strongly is that the best ideas are probably not going to come from me. They're going to come from people that are closest to what's happening, closest to the work. And here's just one example that I'll leave you with as we think about what it means to be a United States Senator. Now, I care a lot about mental health. I think that mental health is health. And I think that too often, people who experience challenges with mental health, there's a big stigma around it. That's basically discrimination. It's basically saying that your mental health care is something to be ashamed of, even though if you broke your arm, we would say, well, you have a physical health problem that you have to take care of. This is really important to me because I see what an impact it has on so many people. It's also important to me because when I was young in college and then when I was a young mom, I also had challenges with mental health. I had issues with depression. I was so lucky that I was able to get the help and the medical care that I needed. But because of that, I appreciate how important it is. So here's what I mean by exactly taking ideas that are happening on the ground and taking them to Washington. When I was first senator, I had a chance to visit a school, and they were doing some amazing things, getting access to mental health care for students in schools. I was blown away by what a great job they were doing. I talked to students and parents and educators and teachers, and I saw what a big difference it made that if there was mental health care services in schools, that students were going to be able to get the help that they needed. It was going to be so much easier than having to, schlep out of, some other place and go find that health care that you need some other place. And so based on what I saw there, I wrote a bill that made it easier for people in the community to come in and provide mental health care services in schools. And that bill was passed. I went around the Senate, I found supporters amongst Republicans and Democrats, and we got that bill passed and signed into law. So, that's just one example, but I think it's an example of what you can do in the United States Senate to help make people's lives better. And that's what gets me up every day. So I'm super excited to hear your questions and to be here with all of you as we think about what it means, that idea of civic responsibility, your faith in the civic process to make the world better, which I have, the belief that in our democracy you have rights and also responsibilities. To me, that's a really important and interesting topic, and I'm so glad to be here today talking to you about it. Thanks.
Thank you, yes. So timely, especially in this pandemic, right? Mental health has been at the forefront of all of our lives, whether we wanted it to be or not. So thank you for naming that, and thank you for continuing to normalize what so many of us experience on a day-to-day basis. We are going to dive right in. Let's dive right into some student questions. Yes. So first question comes from Sean. Is Sean ready to go? There's Sean.
Hi, Sean.
Good morning, Senator Smith. My name is Sean, and my question is, what did you want to be when you were 15 years old, and when did you develop an interest in politics?
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. That's a great question.
Could I just say that I forgot to thank Bergen Silvernail for inviting me to come to school and visit all of you. So thanks, Bergen, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So let's see. When I was 15 and in ninth grade, I was living in Anchorage, Alaska, and I was actually a pretty insecure person. And if somebody had told me when I was in ninth grade that I was one day going to be United States Senator for Minnesota, I would have told them that I had no idea what they were talking about. That could not possibly be true. I think when I was in ninth grade, I was pretty interested in teaching, actually. My mom had been a teacher, and I thought that it would be really wonderful to be a teacher. But I do think, Sean, that one of the things that's interesting about that question is that I came from a family that had a pretty strong belief in civic action. My dad had been on the school board. My mother was really involved in local politics in Alaska. And I sort of always had this idea that to be a member of a democratic society, you had to do more than just be nice to people when you went in the grocery store, that you actually had to think about what your responsibilities were and try to do the work. Everybody does it in different ways, not only in politics, but to do the work of kind of connecting your community and making your community work better. So I was already thinking about that, and I was interested in politics, but I never would have thought that I would have been a senator. So maybe the moral of the story is just remember to keep your options open, because you never know what's going to happen.
Excellent. Senator Smith, reading your biography before you came here today, it said you were born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. How did we come to Alaska, or how did we come to live in Alaska from Albuquerque? Could you take us quickly through that timeline?
Sure. Well, so I was born in Albuquerque. Do you all know where Albuquerque is? New Mexico, that's right. That's where I was born. I lived in a town called Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then my dad got a job in Anchorage, Alaska, and I moved there when I was 12. And that was pretty exciting, and I loved living in Alaska. And then when I was a junior, starting my junior year in high school, my dad got transferred, and we had to move to San Francisco. Now, you probably are thinking that San Francisco is like this incredibly cool town, and everybody would want to live there. I was crestfallen because I did not want to leave my high school. I loved my school. And, but I survived and ended up, now how did I come to Minnesota?
In the 80s,
Yes,
right?
That's right. I met my husband Archie in graduate school, and we picked Minnesota as a place to live. And I honestly, you all, I thought maybe we'd live in Minnesota for a couple of years, and then we would go do something else. And the first winter that I was here, I think I cried all the way through March because I just couldn't believe it was still snowing. And understandable, I know. But we have our, as Kim was saying, we have our 2 children who were raised here, and of course now I can't imagine living anyplace else.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Our next question, River, kind of a follow-up to Sean's question. So go ahead, River.
We've got a cheering section up there, I think you maybe know.
Good morning, Senator Smith. My name is River, and my question is, what advice would you give young people who are interested in political careers in the future?
What advice would I give people who are young people who are interested in political careers in the future? So another really good question, and the first thing, my first piece of advice would be this, is that there are literally dozens and dozens of ways that you can get involved in your community. And you should just find one of them and just do it. And here's an example of what I mean. When I was remember I told you that I was a young mom and I was living in St. Louis Park and I didn't know anybody? I wanted to get involved in the local community, and that campaign seemed like a good way of doing it. So I just showed up to help knock on doors, to talk to my neighbors about a political candidate who I didn't even know. And I fell in love with it, just going door to door and talking to people about what mattered to them, and I loved it. And I learned so much about my community that way. I think I got as much out of it as anybody else did. So, but those kinds of opportunities are there for anybody who wants to grab them. And it might be that you are really interested in like a particular candidate, or it might be that you're really interested in an issue. Maybe you want to work on a particular issue. I mean, there are lots of organizations that are working on, clean water, or other environmental issues, or gun safety, or there are many, many different issues. Just go and figure out how you could volunteer for one of those organizations, and then you'll learn something about what excites you, what you love to do, what you're good at. You'll get good at things. You'll push yourself in ways that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise, and that'll be a learning process. My main advice is to find places where it looks like people are good to each other, they're kind to each other, where they look like they're learning a lot, and where it looks like they're having fun, because it has to be fun. And there'll be lots of opportunities for that. That's what I think.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Our third question is from Safa. Thank you, Safa. Come on.
Hi, Safa.
Good morning, Senator Smith. My name is Safa, and my question for you today is, when Congress is in session, what is a typical professional day like for you?
What's a typical day like for me? Well, so my work life and my personal life now is divided up into two categories. The times when I'm in Washington and the times that I'm at home. So when I'm in Washington, here's what a typical day looks like. Of course, it's been so weird with COVID. Just like all of you, I've had a lot of days where I didn't, barely left my apartment in Washington. I just was on Zoom all the time. That's changing a little bit. But so I guess the first thing is that I have an apartment in Washington. That's where I live when I'm there during the week. I come home on the weekends. I spend my days usually like a typical Tuesday. I will get up in the morning. I am part of a ecumenical group that's about faith and politics, and on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday, I meet with that group by Zoom between 8 and 9, and then I get on a call with other leaders in my caucus, and we talk about what's going to happen for the week, what our strategy is, what legislation we think we're going to be working on the floor of the Senate, and kind of our schedule for the week. And then I'll go into the office, and I will almost always on Tuesdays, I'll be part of a committee hearing or two. So that would what that looks like as I go and I listen to people testify on issues maybe like mental health that I was just talking about. And then I am there with my colleagues to ask questions and learn, and that might be we might be doing that to help us put together new pieces of legislation or to do oversight over the executive branch to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're implementing our laws the way we want them to be implemented. At that point, I probably am going to head over to the Senate floor where it's time because there will be a vote in process. In the Senate, you must be in person to vote. And it's a very kind of old and arcane kind of process, but you go up to the dais in the Senate where there's a senator presiding and you have to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to let the clerks know what your vote is. And then usually when you're on the Senate floor, people are, Republicans and Democrats, we're walking around, we're talking to each other, we're maybe talking about legislation that we care a lot about, or trying to figure out how to find some common ground on an issue that you're working on. So that's like the morning, then we have lunch, and then in the afternoon I often spend a lot of time meeting with Minnesotans who are either in Washington or meeting with them virtually through Zoom. It could be school administrators, or it might be students who are visiting Washington. Last week I visited with 2 groups of students who were visiting. In the afternoon I might have a few more votes, and then it comes to be the end of the day, and then I go home and I do my homework.
Love that. Yes. Senator Smith, just to build off of, you said that during a Senate session that there are folks sometimes walking around the floor, talking to one another, and I think this is the perfect segue. I did some research over the weekend, and a poll done by Pew Research last year concluded that about half of the United States population gets its news from social media. Widely prolific on social media and mainstream media, especially over the last 5 years, is the idea that Congress is extremely polarized and divisive. Do you think that polarized and divisive is a fair characterization of the Senate? And how does this characterization, if it is a reality, impact your ability to serve the state of Minnesota?
So that's a really good question, Kim, and I think my answer is yes and yes. So yes, Washington is very, very polarized. And on the big issues that confront our country, it is often very, very difficult to find common ground. And if you pay attention to social media, or if you watch MSNBC or Fox News, you would think that all we do in Washington is fight with each other. That's what you would think. And it is true, we fight a lot. But there is this whole other Washington where I try to spend most of my time, which is the Washington where Democrats and Republicans are trying to figure things out and solve problems. And that Washington is very real too. So here's what that looks like, just for me. I am pretty worried about what's going on in agriculture in this country, and I'm pretty worried that there is increasingly a lot of concentration where a few big companies own most of the processing for beef cattle, for example. Now, how does that affect any of us? Well, if you talk to your parents, they probably will tell you that hamburger prices are going through the roof. But the other thing that you might not know is that farmers are making pennies on the dollar for the hamburger that they are the beef that they're producing. Now, this isn't a Democratic or Republican issue. This is an issue that I'm working on with my buddy Mike Rounds, who's a Republican from South Dakota. We're trying to figure out how we can address this concentration, which is driving up meat prices and hurting farmers. And we're working on that together. Now, that doesn't get a ton of attention because it's not like a super exciting fight, but it is real. And the reason why I've been able to get over 50 bills and provisions signed into law is because I look for those places where you can figure things out and try to find agreement amongst people. And I did most of that not when President Biden was president. I did most of that before he was president. So that means that my bills were signed into law by a Republican. That's just so important that you find those places where you can agree. And there's a lot more to talk about with that, but I think that's, yeah.
Thank you, because truly, you know, those of us who consume the media, which you cannot not consume the media. I mean, it is so good to hear that even though it is not getting the publicity and it is not being sensationalized, that this work is being done, because we know that this work is important for our country to move forward.
And you know, you were talking about social media, and I bet everybody in this room knows this. You get more attention on social media when you're snarky and when you're mean than when you're kind and gentle. You get more attention. And so that's like why I try to spend very, very little time on social media. I try to spend as little time as I possibly can on social media. As I say to my staff, you know, it's the Twitterverse, not the universe. And don't forget that in any part of your life when you're thinking about social media, because it is, it's not that it isn't real, it's part of reality, but it is not the whole reality by a long, long shot in Washington and in real life.
So good to hear. Thank you for that. Our next question is from Uriel. Thank you. Come on.
Good morning, Senator Smith. My name is Uriel, and my question is, what are the most important aspects of your job?
Could you say that, most important aspects of?
Most important aspects.
Of my job? It's really a good question. You're studying civics, so you're studying what the role is of the legislative branch. And as you get into the legislative branch, you'll figure out that in the Senate, our jobs are to, of course, pass laws that then the president signs into law or not. Our job is to provide advice and consent to the president when he makes nominations, for example, the Secretary of Agriculture or the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State. The Senate has to vote to say, yes, we think that that individual has the capacity and the qualifications to be in that role. So that's a really important part of my job. Another really, this is defined in the Constitution, I have to vote to approve judges. So judges are nonpartisan. They are, though, confirmed by the United States Senate. So that's an important part of my job as well. This is very interesting because in the coming days, President Biden will be nominating a new Supreme Court justice. So one of the most important parts of my job will be to vet that Supreme Court justice and make sure that I believe that she will be, is capable of serving on our country's highest court. So that's what the Constitution says my job is, and that's all very, very important. But I think that the other part of my job is to really understand as very best I can my state and the people that live in it, and then use that understanding to make the best decisions about how to make our country work better for more people. And that is really about listening and learning from people and having a lot of humility, figuring out that you might have an idea that could be wrong, and then learning from that and bringing up the very best ideas that I can.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more student questions remaining, so I'm going to go right into our 5th question from Riley. Thank you, Riley. Come on up.
Hi, Riley.
Good morning, Senator Smith. My name is good morning, men. Good morning. Good morning, Senator. Good morning, Senator Smith. My name is Riley. My question is for you. How has your work life changed without COVID?
Life changed with COVID. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I bet, even though you might think that we don't have a lot in common, I bet we have a lot in common when it comes to thinking about how my life has changed because of COVID and how your lives have changed because of COVID. And it's been a process, right? You know, like what was happening, and I try to think about where you all were in February of 2020. You were
7th grade? Was that
7th grade? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we first realized that we had an epidemic and then a pandemic on our hands, what happened is that I had to work from home here in Minnesota for quite a few weeks. The Senate really wasn't in session at all. And then I went back to Washington, and I worked almost exclusively from my apartment doing Zoom calls. I don't know about you, but spending all day long on computers and Zooming is absolutely exhausting, right?
Agreed.
It's just so exhausting. And so I had to figure out how to take care of myself and not just get totally exhausted in the middle of all of that pandemic. And making sure that I was getting outside and getting fresh air. I mean, I had to do all of that just like I'm sure a lot of you had to figure out how to do. Now that I believe we are at a place where we are going to be I think we're going to be in a much, much better place with the pandemic because we have vaccines and boosters and we have antiviral treatments so that if you do get sick, the likelihood that you go to the hospital or get really, really sick is much, much decreased. I think we're going to be in we are already in a much, much better place. And so I'm starting to feel like the things that I used to do, that I love to do, I'm able to do a lot more. Like hang out with my dad, who's 91 years old, and see my brothers and their families that live a long way away, and of course hanging out with our own kids. When our grandson Ari was born in June of 2020, he lives just a block or two from where Archie and I live, but I wasn't able to hold him for 3 months because of COVID. So that was really tough too. Everybody has had this. Everybody has gone through this. And it's, as you can see as I answer that question, like, don't you feel like you're like, I don't know, I think of like for you all, some of you may have jobs and then you have school and then you have your personal life, but it all just kind of mushed together, right? Everything became one big kind of blob.
For lack of a better word,
Right.
absolutely.
And I think that's what it was for me too.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And our final question comes from Jaden. Please, Jaden.
Hi, Jaden.
Okay.
It's weird when you hear your voice through a microphone the first time.
Yes, okay. Thank you for coming today, Senator Smith. My name is Jaden, and my question is, how do you balance time with your family and work? Is it challenging? How so?
Yeah, that's a great question. here's what I think about that. I've thought about this a lot. Sometimes when you think about work-life balance, you have this idea that the goal is to be perfectly balanced all the time, right? I should, like, every day I should have exactly the right balance of family time and work time, and I'm always just like completely in equilibrium, just balanced out. But I don't know about you, but I've never actually been in that perfect place of balance. It just doesn't really happen that way. And so I think of it as, like, if it's a seesaw, you're not like perfectly balanced and not moving, you're kind of, going like this, a little bit back and forth. Sometimes you have to put more into your, into your work life or your school life, and then sometimes you have to prioritize your personal self and your care and being with family and taking care of yourself. And that's okay, that's the way it's supposed to be. What you want to avoid, what I try to avoid, is just like the boom, 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 like no family, all work. I really try to avoid that, because the problem with that is that I lose my resilience, my ability to like go with the flow and not get freaked out when things don't go right. And so over time I've learned, how to do that. Everybody has their own way of doing it. I like go out and go for walks. I spend time with my husband and my, family and my grandchildren, and that keeps me balanced. I also I meditate. Not like a big deal, like I don't go home or anything like that, but I sit quietly and I try to be in the moment, and that really has helped me to figure out how to not kind of teeter-totter wildly.
Such great advice. Thank you. Thank you. Senator, with our last 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to wrap up this time.
I just really am grateful to all of you. I appreciate your warm welcome, and I really appreciate the questions that you've asked. And your questions tell me that you are, really working to figure out how to be happy and productive in this really challenging time that we are facing. They also tell me that in the midst of this civics class that you're taking as 9th graders, that you're thinking about what it means to be a citizen in a democracy and what that job looks like. Because it is kind of a job, in a good way, I would say, not in a bad way. One thing about democracies are that people who live in them, like us, and do you know that only about half of the people in this world live in a democracy? Only about half. Some say it's a little less, it depends on how you count it. When you live in a democracy, you tend to have the idea that that democracy is just gonna hang around forever, and it's like a plant that doesn't ever need water or fertilizer. It's just gonna keep on growing. And what I would say to you is that this democracy is ours if we can keep it. If we can keep it healthy and strong. And that's not just my job, it's all of our jobs. So as you're thinking about what you're learning in civics, I wonder if you might just give some thought to what this really means. And Kim, maybe this is part of what you all are talking about. What does it mean to have, to be a citizen in a democracy? What is your responsibility? And what are your rights? What are those rights that you have that you need to make sure don't get taken away? It's incredibly interesting, creative, dynamic process, democracies are. I feel really blessed to be able to play this role that I have right now in the United States Senate to kind of keep our democracy going. But I'm really excited about the roles that all of you will play. You're in 9th grade, you'll be voting before you know it. Which gives me a lot of hope, frankly. So thank you so much to all of you. I'm so excited to be with you.
Thank you. Wow. Senator Smith, on behalf of Apple Valley High School, we extend our gratitude to you for spending your time with us this morning. Thank you for this, and thank you so much for your